So I'm going to get right into our operations with functions. We're going to talk about adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing with functions. And I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because it's very intuitive. It's pretty much exactly what we'd expect. That if I want to take these functions f and g, and I want to say what is the sum of f plus g of x, then literally what I'm going to do is I'm going to take f of x and add that to g of x. F of x in this case is defined as 3x plus 2. G of x is defined as 7x minus 5. And this really just turns into a combined like terms situation. And so it should be very straightforward, very simple for addition. Now for subtraction, if I want to subtract f minus g, this should become, as you'd expect, f of x minus g of x. The only kind of trick, the only thing to be aware of in this case is to remember to subtract all of g. So by subtracting all of g, we're saying make sure you have parentheses around g, which basically means distribute that negative, and then we can combine like terms. So pretty straightforward, pretty simple. As we get into multiplication and division, same idea. F times g would be f of x times g of x, where f of x was 3x plus 2, g of x was 7x minus 5, and so it becomes just a FOIL situation. I'm multiplying a binomial times a binomial here, so my first is 21x squared, my outside is negative 15x, my inside is 14x, and my last is negative 10, and then I would just combine like terms. And that's multiplication. Now, division is actually even easier. So division says let's take f of x, divide it by g of x, where f of x was 3x plus 2, g of x was 7x minus 5, and really that's it. If this simplifies, great. We'll go ahead and try to factor the top, factor the bottom, see if there's a common factor. That's all well and good. Now, one thing that we should probably specify is we probably should remember that whatever is in the bottom can't be 0. So we probably should say something along the lines of, hey, this is the quotient, this is what I get when I divide. Just remember that your bottom can't be 0. So x can't be 5/7. So the one thing I want to say just as far as your own studying when it comes to these operations with functions is don't forget to review this before the exam. This material is really, really easy, and we're going to deal with something that's a little more complicated called the composition. Composition looks very similar to multiplication. It's f of g of x. So that's the composition right here, and we're going to talk about that here in just a moment. But I want to point that out just in terms of making sure that you do study this and remind yourself, oh yeah, there was this thing called multiplication. Because if you get a multiplication problem on the exam, it should be gimme points. And if you accidentally do composition instead, you're going to get it wrong. And that's going to suck to miss those points. So just make sure you're careful with remembering that these things exist and to remind yourself before the test.